I blinked as the man stood in front of me. Tall, with curly dark hair, broad shoulders, and ridiculously handsome. Stupidly handsome, but what threw me off wasn't his face. It was the small pastel gift bag he held out to me. I looked at the bag, then at him, before awkwardly clearing my throat. Henry. I'm not allowed to accept gifts, I said softly, his brows furrowed in confusion. Why not? He asked softly. I glanced past him. The bookstore was fairly busy, customers wandered the aisles with books in their hands, and a small line had already begun forming behind him. The only problem, he wasn't holding a single book. I'm at work, I explained with a polite smile. If you're not going to buy anything, then please step aside. He frowned again, almost looking offended. You still haven't accepted my thank you, and I interrupted gently but firmly. And I was only doing what any normal person would have done, so please step aside if you're not going to purchase anything. His eyes widened for a brief moment before his lips pressed into a thin line. Okay. His voice low and took the gift bag back, stepped aside, and quietly left the store. The automatic doors slid shut behind him, and I let out a breath. Oh, sweetie, an older woman said as she walked up to my register with a stack of books. Why'd you reject him? He's a cutie. I laughed awkwardly as I began scanning her books. I didn't reject him. She gave me a knowing smile that clearly said otherwise. Maybe I had, a little, but I had a good reason. That man wasn't just some handsome stranger trying to thank me. He was Henry Kang, the son of Justin Kang. As in, the Kang family. The family is rumored to own a large portion of the casinos throughout the city. I'd heard of them a few times, but I was not part of that world until a couple weeks ago. I had only been covering a shift for a coworker who called in sick. Extra shifts meant extra money, and I loved money, so saying yes had been an easy decision. During my lunch break, I grabbed a sandwich from the cafe across the street and was walking back toward the bookstore when shouting suddenly erupted nearby. Before I could even process what was happening, loud gunshots echoed through the street. My entire body froze. For one horrifying second, I thought I'd been shot. People screamed as they scattered in every direction, some diving behind cars while others ran without looking back. My eyes darted around frantically and landed on several people lying on the ground while others in black suits exchanged gunfire. Every instinct told me to run, but another instinct won instead. My mom had been a nurse my entire life, and she drilled one lesson into me since I was little. If someone needed help and you knew how to help, you did. Without thinking, I ran toward the injured. The first man I reached was enormous, dressed in a black suit with blood pouring from a gunshot wound in his thigh. I dropped to my knees beside him and immediately reached for the wound, but he grabbed my wrist with surprising strength. Help, Mr. Kang, he groaned through clenched teeth. You're bleeding, I protested. I need to stop this first. He shook his head fiercely despite the pain. Boss first. I followed the direction he pointed and spotted another man crouched behind a black SUV, one hand gripping a pistol while trying desperately to shield the another man slumped against the vehicle. Even from several feet away, I could see the blood soaking through his dress shirt. There was far too much of it. As I hurried over, the bodyguard immediately swung his gun toward me. I froze, both hands flying into the air. Not here to hurt anyone, I blurted out. I'm here to help. He didn't lower the gun, but he didn't shoot either. That was enough for me. I rushed to the wounded man's side and immediately assessed the wound. Damn it, I muttered under my breath. He was losing blood fast. Without giving myself time to think, I pulled my work shirt over my head, leaving me standing there in nothing but my bra. Both him and the bodyguard stared at me in complete shock. What are you? He started weakly, but I ignored him. I twisted my shirt into a makeshift bandage and pressed it firmly against the wound before wrapping it tightly around his waist to slow the bleeding. He hissed in pain as I secured it. I know it hurts, I said calmly. It has to. Once the bleeding had slowed enough, I crouched in front of him and checked his pupils. Look at me, I instructed. His eyelids drooped. No, don't you dare fall asleep. I held out my hand. Give me your hand, he weakly obeyed. Good, now squeeze my hand every 3 seconds. He did, though each squeeze felt weaker than the last. To keep him conscious, I continued talking. What's your name? Henry. He spoke softly. What's your favorite color? He blinked. Blue. Favorite food? Steak. Good, keep talking to me. More gunshots rang out, closer this time. Men shouted. Glass shattered somewhere nearby. Instinctively, I leaned over Justin, shielding him with my own body as bullets continued flying overhead. I was still standing there in only my bra, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst out of my chest, but none of that mattered. Not when someone underneath me was fighting to stay alive. I stayed there, protecting him as best I could, until finally, the sound of approaching sirens filled the street. Police officers, paramedics, and more black SUVs flooded the scene. The gunfire slowly came to an end as paramedics rushed over and took over treating Henry. Only then did I finally allow myself to breathe and embarrassment took over that I was in my bra. I thought that would be the end of it. I saved a stranger's life, went back to work, and returned to my normal routine. I had no idea that the man I'd saved belonged to one of the most powerful mafia families in the city, and that from that day forward, the Kang family would refuse to let me disappear from their lives. Henry, seriously, I'm fine. I locked the bookstore door and looked up at him as he stood beside me. How many times do I have to tell you that I don't need you to walk me home? I slipped the store keys into my backpack and started walking. After all, I only lived 10 minutes away. Henry, of course, fell into step beside me. I'm taking a nice walk as well, he said casually. I rolled my eyes, humming in amusement. Sure you are. The rest of the walk was quiet. It had been like this for the past several days. For some reason, Henry was everywhere. When I opened the bookstore, he'd somehow appear with coffee. During my lunch break, he'd conveniently be nearby. When my shift ended, he'd insist on walking me home. Didn't he have an organization to run? Meetings? Men to manage? Honestly, I had no idea how any of that worked. All I knew was that wherever I went, there was Henry. Before I realized it, we'd reached my apartment. I unlocked the door and glanced back at him. Well, I'm home now. Thanks for walking with me. Henry nodded before a small smile appeared on his face. There it is, I thought as warmth spread across my cheeks. That smile should have been illegal. Good night, he said softly. Good night, I whispered back before stepping inside my apartment and locking the door behind me. Leaning against it, I let out a quiet sigh. I'd be lying if I said I didn't like Henry or didn't find him attractive. I did. In fact, I could feel myself falling for him more every day. Who wouldn't? He was a tall, ridiculously handsome man who constantly found reasons to see me. He listened whenever I rambled about romance books, showed up at the bookstore with flowers, walked me home every evening, and even invited me to dinner as repayment for saving his life. When I finally agreed, the evening had been wonderful. I'd felt spoiled, cherished, almost loved. Henry had been kind, thoughtful, patient, and nothing like the cold, ruthless man the news articles described. Sometimes it honestly felt like he liked me too, like I was someone special to him. I just wished it were under different circumstances. Henry was a mafia heir, someone who belonged to a dangerous world I knew nothing about, while I was just a bookstore employee living in a tiny apartment. Someone like me didn't belong beside someone like him. I knew that, especially after what I'd seen. 3 days ago, Henry had invited me to have lunch at his office. I'd been embarrassingly excited. I'd spent nearly an hour picking out a pretty pink dress, curled my hair into soft waves, put on light makeup, baked chocolate chip cookies because he'd once mentioned they were his favorite, and even bought him a pink strawberry drink. We'd been spending time together for over 2 weeks, just as friends, of course, but somewhere along the way, I'd started hoping for something more. I remembered stepping out of the elevator and spotting him down the hallway. He was standing with a man I assumed was his assistant, looking through a stack of files. I was just about to call his name when another woman beat me to it. Henry, she called confidently. I blinked. First of all, she was absolutely gorgeous. The kind of woman who looked like she belonged beside someone like Henry. Before I could even react, she walked straight up to him, grabbed his necktie, pulled him down, and kissed him. My eyes widened. My heart dropped straight into my stomach. Before either of them could notice me, I quickly hid behind the hallway corner. I swallowed hard, suddenly feeling unbelievably foolish. What had I been thinking? Me, Henry, together. Like I was the heroine in one of the romance novels I shelved every day. Not once had Henry actually said he liked me that way. He'd never confessed, never flirted, never asked me on a real date. The dinner had been repayment. The flowers, maybe he was just grateful. The walks home, maybe he simply felt responsible because I'd gotten caught in his world. I'd mistaken kindness for affection. Maybe this was simply how Henry treated people he cared about. Maybe he genuinely only wanted to be my friend. And I'd gone and built an entire love story inside my head. Taking a shaky breath, I turned around before anyone could see me, rode the elevator back downstairs, and crossed the street to the cafe. If Henry came looking for me, I'd still have lunch with him. I'd smile, pretend nothing had happened, and quietly tuck my silly little crush back where it belonged, inside the pages of a romance novel.
Gift rejected. Again, I frowned as I sat on the edge of my bed, my gaze drifting toward the 3 small pastel gift bags lined neatly on my dresser. Every single one had been rejected. Not harshly, not rudely. YN was far too kind for that, but always with the same gentle smile and the same explanation. I only did what any normal person would have done, except that wasn't true. Any normal person would have run if the second bullet started flying. Any normal person would have hidden behind a car and waited for the police. She didn't. She ran toward the gunfire. She took off her own shirt to stop my bleeding without a second thought. She shielded me with her body while bullets flew overhead. She looked me directly in the eyes and told me not to die. There wasn't a single normal thing about what she'd done for me. I leaned back against the headboard and let out a slow sigh before lying flat on the mattress, staring at the ceiling. I had meetings tomorrow, shipments to inspect, casinos to visit, men waiting for orders. There was always something demanding my attention. Yet no matter how hard I tried to focus on work, my thoughts always wandered back to her. Her smile, her laugh, the way she looked me in the eye without fear. Well, she used to. Our friendship had grown naturally over the past few weeks. We'd have dinner, I'd bring her flowers, walk her home after work, stop by the bookstore whenever I could find an excuse, and somehow she'd always end up talking about whatever romance novel she'd just finished. I never understood half of the plots she rambled about, but I loved listening because she lit up every time she talked. Then, something changed. I didn't know what. All I knew was that after I invited her to lunch at my office, everything felt different. We ended up meeting at the cafe across the street instead, and, God, she looked beautiful that day. She wore a soft pink dress, her hair fell in gentle waves around her shoulders, and there was just enough makeup to make her eyes stand out even more. She was carrying a pink drink, and for a brief moment I wondered if she'd bought it because it matched her dress. I remember thinking she looked so unbelievably cute that I almost forgot what I wanted to say to her. But despite her smile, I felt it. A wall, invisible yet impossible to ignore. She still laughed, she still spoke to me kindly, but she wasn't looking at me the same way anymore. It was as if she'd quietly taken a step back, and no matter how many steps I took forward, I couldn't close the distance between us. I rubbed a hand over my face and sighed again. I didn't know how to do this. Negotiating million-dollar deals. Easy. Running an organization. Easy. Handling rival families. Easier than I'd like to admit. But telling one woman how I felt. Impossible. I thought my actions spoke for themselves. The flowers, the gifts, walking her home every night. Finding excuses to spend time with her. Smiling more because I'd noticed she blushed whenever I did. I even caught myself practicing in the mirror once, wondering if I looked too intimidating when I smiled. Pathetic. None of it seemed to matter anymore. YN was the first woman who never looked at me and saw the Heir. She didn't see the casinos, the money, the bodyguards, or the blood attached to my family's name. She saw me, a man bleeding on the pavement, someone worth saving, someone worth protecting. Even when I was at my weakest, covered in blood, she never looked away. She held my hand, looked straight into my eyes, and ordered me not to die as if losing me would have mattered to her. I think that was the moment I fell in love with her, and somehow with every day that passed I only fell harder, because when she looked at me she didn't see a monster, she didn't see a Mafia heir, she treated me like I was just Henry, just a person, and somewhere along the way she became my person, even if she had no idea she already held my heart. Sir, my assistant Jack blinked in confusion as he stood in front of my desk. I barely looked up from my computer. What else do women like? I asked while continuing to type. Jack paused, clearly caught off guard by the question. My wife loves it when I bring home her favorite snacks. I immediately shook my head. No gifts. Something more, not gift-giving. I recalled back to the gifts that YN already kindly rejected. Jack nodded thoughtfully before setting a stack of files on my desk. Well, my wife likes it when I talk about my day. She says it's nice hearing my thoughts, what happened at work, if something funny happened, or if I'm stressed. I blinked. Had I ever actually talked to YN? I listened to her all the time. I knew her favorite romance novels, which authors disappointed her, and how she could somehow compare every real-life situation to a fictional couple. I could listen to her speak all day without getting bored, but had I ever really let her know me, or had I simply smiled and asked another question about her? Jack tilted his head. Did that help, sir? I pressed my lips together. Maybe. A brief silence settled between us before another question slipped out. Jack, how did you and your wife start dating? His eyebrows shot up. I asked her out, right? That was generally how people started relationships. I'd never actually done that before. I'd had flings, casual arrangements, and friends with benefits, but a real relationship had never crossed my mind. Not until YN. I cleared my throat awkwardly. So, a friend wanted to know how to ask out a girl, and I couldn't really give him any advice since I've never done that. Jack looked at me for a long moment, but thankfully played along. I think your friend should just tell her how he feels. That's really it. I frowned. And if she says no, then she says no. Your friend moves on. I stared at my keyboard before correcting myself mid-sentence. What if my friend doesn't want to lose her? Jack thought for a moment before shrugging. Then he has two choices. He keeps quiet and stays friends, or he confesses and risks losing her. I slowly nodded. I see. Jack hesitated before adding, but if your friend never says anything, he has to be prepared to watch another man ask her out first. My jaw clenched instantly. Another man, YN, with someone else walking her home, making her laugh, listening to her ramble about books, holding her hand. No, absolutely not. The mere thought twisted something ugly inside my chest. I took a slow breath, forcing my expression back to normal. I see, I'll tell him. Jack nodded before leaving my office and quietly shutting the door behind him. The room fell silent. I stared at my computer for several long seconds before opening my browser. My fingers hovered over the keyboard as I reluctantly typed how to ask out a woman. Hundreds of articles immediately appeared. 10 ways to tell if she likes you. Signs she's waiting for you to make the first move. How to confess your feelings without making it awkward. I frowned at the screen. This is hard.
I let out a small yawn as I locked the bookstore's front door, slipping the keys into my backpack before checking the time on my phone. Henry was late. That rarely happened, and by rarely, I mean he was late once and somehow still met me at my apartment. I found myself glancing up and down the street, almost expecting him to magically appear around the corner. Maybe he got busy, I mumbled to myself. He did run an entire organization, after all. I adjusted the strap of my backpack and started walking home alone. The streets were quieter than usual, the evening air cool against my skin as the city slowly settled into the night. I had only walked a few blocks when the uneasy feeling started. Footsteps, more than one pair. I frowned slightly and glanced behind me. 3 men stood farther down the sidewalk. They weren't talking. They were just walking. I looked forward again, telling myself I was imagining things, but when I crossed the street, so did they. My grip tightened around my backpack strap. Don't panic, I picked up my pace. Their footsteps did the same, my heartbeat quickened. I turned another corner, so did they. Miss! One of them suddenly called out. I didn't answer. Miss, wait! The second his voice grew closer, every instinct screamed at me to run. I broke into a sprint. Get her! Someone shouted behind me. My blood ran cold. I didn't dare look back. My lungs burned as I ran through the streets, my backpack bouncing against my back while my mind raced. Why me? Why are they chasing me? My foot caught the edge of the sidewalk, sending me stumbling forward. Before I could hit the ground, I crashed straight into someone's chest. Strong hands caught my arms, steadying me. Whoa! I looked up, breathing hard. Henry! Relief hit me so suddenly my knees almost gave out. He stared at me in alarm, still holding a bouquet of soft pink flowers in one hand. YN! His eyes immediately swept over me. What's wrong? I grabbed the front of his jacket, struggling to catch my breath. There, someone chasing me. The warmth vanished from his face in an instant. His expression hardened into something I'd never seen directed at me before. Cold, dangerous. He glanced past me and spotted the men sprinting toward us. Without saying another word, he grabbed my hand. Run! We darted down a narrow alley before cutting through another passage between 2 buildings. Henry pulled me behind a large dumpster tucked into the shadows, one arm wrapping securely around my waist as he guided me against the brick wall. Stay quiet, he whispered. I nodded, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain the men outside could hear it. Footsteps echoed into the alley. They came this way, one man shouted, another cursed. Spread out! I instinctively reached for Henry's hand. He immediately intertwined our fingers, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze without taking his eyes off the alley entrance. I held my breath as the footsteps came closer, closer. until they stopped just beyond the dumpster. "They're not here. Check the next street." Several long, agonizing seconds passed before the footsteps finally began fading away. We remained perfectly still, neither of us daring to move until the sounds disappeared completely. Only then did Henry slowly exhale. He looked down at me, his eyes filled with worry and guilt. His grip on my hand tightened ever so slightly. "I was late," he murmured, his voice low with frustration. "I'm sorry." I blushed as I sat on the edge of the enormous bed, my hands resting awkwardly in my lap while I looked around the hotel room. It was far too fancy for someone like me. The room was bigger than my entire apartment. The furniture looked expensive enough to make me nervous, and even the curtains probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. Henry had insisted I stay here until he figured out who had tried to kidnap me, refusing to let me return to my apartment no matter how many times I'd argued. "You're not going back until I know you're safe," he'd said in a tone that left absolutely no room for discussion. Thankfully, one of his men had stopped by my apartment long enough for me to grab a few changes of clothes and some necessities. Still, I wanted to go home. I carefully looked around the room, almost afraid to touch anything. If I accidentally broke something, I'd probably spend the next 10 years paying it off. My gaze eventually landed on the bouquet of soft pink flowers resting on the table near the window. Henry had still been carrying them when I'd crashed into him. I tilted my head. Who had he been planning to give those to? My thoughts froze for a second before my cheeks slowly warmed. Wait, he had been on his way to meet me. Were they for me? Heat spread across my face as my imagination wandered somewhere it absolutely shouldn't. Maybe Henry liked me too. Maybe the flowers had been for me all along. I hugged a pillow to my chest before quickly shaking my head. "No," I muttered to myself. "Don't do that." I knew where I belonged, and it certainly wasn't beside the heir of the Kang family. I took a slow breath, forcing the thought away before climbing off the bed. My bare feet sank into the softest carpet I'd ever felt, making me pause for a second in disbelief. Was the carpet even supposed to be this soft? Shaking my head again, I made my way into the bathroom. Maybe a hot shower would help. Maybe it would wash away the fear, the adrenaline, and the memory of strangers chasing me through the streets. I turned on the water and waited for it to warm, but despite my best efforts, my thoughts drifted right back to Henry. I remembered how he'd grabbed my hand without hesitation, how he'd pulled me close behind the dumpster, one arm securely around my waist while shielding me from anyone who might find us. My heart had been pounding so hard I thought it would burst from my chest, though I wasn't entirely sure it had only been because I was terrified. My cheeks burned as I remembered just how close we'd been, close enough that I could hear every steady beat of his heart. I let myself indulge in the memory for only a moment before groaning softly and covering my face with both hands. "Get it together," I mumbled to my reflection in the mirror. "You literally almost got kidnapped." Yet somehow, all I could think about was the man who'd caught me before I could fall. I let out another yawn as the television played some late-night cooking show in the background. The cheerful host enthusiastically described the perfect way to sear a steak, but I wasn't really paying attention. My eyelids kept growing heavier. I really wanted to stay awake until Henry came back, but I had no idea when that would be. He'd only told me he had to take care of the situation and promised he'd return later. That had been hours ago. Since then, I'd texted my boss to explain what had happened, leaving out the kidnapping part and simply saying there had been an emergency, so I wouldn't be able to come in tomorrow. Thankfully, she understood and told me not to worry about work. After that, I'd cautiously called room service. I'd spent nearly 5 minutes studying the menu, immediately looking for the cheapest thing they had because there was no way I could afford food from a hotel like this. I was just about to hang up and survive on the snacks in my backpack instead when the employee politely informed me that all expenses had already been covered. I must have asked her 3 separate times if she was sure. She'd laughed softly each time before assuring me it had indeed been taken care of. Even then, I still ordered the least expensive meal out of habit. When it finally arrived, one of the guards standing outside my door politely asked me to wait before taking my plate. To my complete disbelief, he actually sampled each item first. "Just a precaution, ma'am," he'd explained. I had stared at him the entire time, completely speechless. People actually did this. After he nodded that everything was safe, I finally ate my dinner, though I couldn't stop thinking about how surreal my life had suddenly become. Yesterday, I was shelving novels and worrying about rent. Today, I was staying in a luxury hotel under the protection of Mafia bodyguards who taste-tested my food. I pulled the blanket higher around myself as another yawn escaped me. My eyes slowly drifted shut before snapping open again. No, stay awake. I wanted to see Henry when he came back. I wanted to know he was okay. I wanted to ask if he'd found out who those men were. But despite my best efforts, my eyelids grew heavier and heavier until the voices from the television became nothing more than distant background noise. And somewhere between one blink and the next, I quietly fell asleep on the bed, still waiting for Henry to come back.
I quietly unlocked the hotel room door and stepped inside, careful not to make a sound. The television was still playing some late-night cooking show, its soft glow illuminating the dark room. My eyes immediately found her. YN was asleep on the bed, the blanket loosely wrapped around her, her chest rising and falling in a slow, peaceful rhythm. I stood there for a long moment, simply watching her. Safe, she was safe. That's all that mattered. A breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding finally escaped my lungs. Earlier tonight, we tracked down the three men who'd tried to take her. It hadn't taken long before they started talking. Half their faces were bruised, one had a broken nose, and another could barely stand after the interrogation. They eventually gave me the name I was expecting, a rival organization hoping to use YN as leverage against me. I wasn't surprised, angry, yes, surprised, no. My gaze drifted to my hands, my knuckles were split open, dried blood coating my skin. Some of it was mine, most of it wasn't. I clenched my fists before slowly relaxing them again. I had been careless, so damn careless. I didn't pay attention to my surrounding. I'd been late just once, just one time, and because of that, she'd almost been taken because of me. My eyes returned to her sleeping face. She looked so peaceful, so beautiful, like a dream I never wanted to wake up from. I found myself taking a slow step closer. My hand lifted on its own, wanting nothing more than to gently brush a loose strand of hair away from her face, but just before my fingertips reached her, I stopped. My hand hovered in the air before slowly falling back to my side. My hands were too stained, too bloody. They didn't deserve to touch someone as gentle as her. She saved lives. I had taken them. She spent her days helping strangers, recommending books, smiling at customers, while I spent mine making decisions that ended with blood on my hands. We didn't belong in the same world. We didn't belong together. The thought settled heavily in my chest as I quietly tucked my injured hands behind my back. Henry, my heart skipped. I looked up to find YN blinking sleepily at me. She slowly pushed herself upright, rubbing her eyes with the back of her hand as she yawned. Instinctively, I took half a step back, keeping my bloodied hands hidden behind me before she could notice them. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "I didn't mean to wake you." YN let out another sleepy yawn as she rubbed her eyes. "You should go back to sleep," I said quietly. "It's late." She immediately shook her head, those warm brown eyes lifting to meet mine. My heart pounded against my ribs. There it was again, the way she looked directly into my eyes without fear, without hesitation. I doubted she'd ever realize what that did to me. "Did you find them?" she asked softly. "Can I go home?" I swallowed before answering. "Yes, I found them." I hesitated. "But I don't think you can go home for a little while, not until I've dealt with this properly." A small frown appeared on her face as she sat up straighter. "What do you mean?" She suddenly stopped mid-sentence, her eyes narrowing as she studied me. "Come here," I blinked. "What, come here?" she repeated, her voice gentle but firm. Without thinking, I obeyed. I stepped closer to the bed before lowering myself onto one knee on the soft carpet so we were at eye level. She scooted toward the edge of the mattress until we were only inches apart. I stared into her beautiful brown eyes, completely captivated. God, I loved her eyes. They were so warm, so kind. They made me feel like I wasn't Henry Kang, heir to a mafia empire. They made me feel human. "You got hurt," she said, frowning. "What did you do?" I paused, remembering the punch I'd taken while Nick and I were cornering the men who'd chased her. It hardly hurt anymore. Compared to the thought of losing her, it was nothing. She reached up so gently that I almost didn't notice until her fingertips brushed against the bruise forming on my cheek. My breath caught, every nerve in my body focused solely on the warmth of her touch. "Henry," she whispered. "We need to get a first aid kit and clean this before." I didn't hear another word she said. I was too busy memorizing her face, too busy admiring the way concern filled her eyes. Concern for me. My chest felt so painfully full that I couldn't hold it in anymore. Before I could stop myself, the words escaped. "I love you." YN blinked, her eyes widened. What? She whispered. I lowered my head for a moment, laughing bitterly at myself. So much for slowly confessing. So much for following any of the advice I'd spent hours reading online. I took a shaky breath before looking back up at her. I love you, YN. My voice came out quieter this time, but steadier. I think I've loved you ever since you looked me in the eyes that day and told me not to die. The words poured out before I could stop them. You never looked at me like I was the Kang heir. You never looked at me with fear. You saw a man bleeding on the ground and you decided his life was worth saving. My throat tightened. You listened to me. You make me smile without even trying. I look forward to hearing you talk about books I don't even understand. I find excuses to walk you home. I bring you flowers because I see them and immediately think of you. Every meeting I attend, every decision I make, somehow my thoughts always come back to you. I let out a quiet laugh at myself. I've never done this before, I've never wanted this before, but then you came into my life. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep looking at her despite every instinct telling me to look away. I know I'm not a good man, why in my hands? I glanced down at them. They're stained with things I'd never want you to see. You save lives, I've taken them. We belong in completely different worlds. I looked back into her eyes, stopping myself from reaching up to cup her face, terrified I'd scare her away. But despite knowing all of that, I still fell in love with you. YN remained perfectly still. Her cheeks had turned a deep shade of pink, her beautiful brown eyes impossibly wide, and her lips were parted in complete surprise. She simply stared at me. I smiled again and leaned a bit closer where we could almost kiss. And I will never let you go.
My brain stopped working. I instinctively scooted back a little on the bed, staring at Henry as my heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Did he? Did he really just say he loved me? My cheeks burned as his confession replayed over and over in my mind. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. For the past few days, I'd been convincing myself that I'd imagined everything. The flowers, the dinners, the walks home, the little smiles that always made my heart skip a beat. I'd convinced myself they meant nothing more than gratitude because I'd saved his life. I told myself Henry couldn't possibly look at me the way I looked at him. Yet here he was, kneeling in front of me, confessing with such sincerity that my chest ached. My gaze slowly drifted down to his hands, noticing the split skin across his knuckles and the dried blood staining them before my eyes moved to the bruise on his cheek. My heart squeezed painfully. Without thinking, I reached for one of his hands. Henry immediately pulled it back, hiding it behind him. "My hands are dirty," he murmured, and I frowned. "I don't care." He looked away. "They're stained, and I've done terrible things." A quiet sigh escaped me. "I know." His eyes slowly lifted to mine. "I've known since the day I found you bleeding in the street. Your last name explained everything." I wiggled my fingers toward him. "Give me your hand." He hesitated for only a moment before, like always, obeying. I carefully turned his injured hand over, frowning at the cuts across his swollen knuckles. "You got hurt." Henry shook his head. "It doesn't matter." "It matters to me." I frowned up at him. "You're important, after all." His breath caught. "To you." My cheeks warmed as I nodded shyly. "Yes." I took a shaky breath before finally admitting what had been weighing on my heart. "I saw a woman kiss you." Henry blinked. "What?" "The day you invited me to lunch." I lowered my gaze, suddenly embarrassed. "She grabbed your tie and kissed you. I thought she was your girlfriend. I thought the flowers were because you felt guilty, the dinner was repayment, and the walks home were because you felt responsible somehow and only wanted to be friends." Henry stared at me in stunned silence before letting out a quiet, disbelieving laugh. "You thought I didn't love you." I nodded. He sighed and rubbed a hand over his face. "She's the daughter of one of our business partners. I rejected an arranged marriage proposal months ago." My eyes widened. "What?" "She kissed me," he said firmly. "I did not kiss her back." "You didn't?" He immediately shook his head. "I pushed her away." He ran a frustrated hand through his hair. "Fuck. No wonder you've been so distant." I looked away, hoping he hadn't noticed, but apparently he had. Henry then stood up and placed his knee rested on the bed between us, leaning forward just enough that there was nowhere for me to retreat. "I love you, YN," he said softly. "I love you so much it hurts. I love you, and like I said before, I'm never letting you go. I love." Okay, I blurted out, cutting him off. I love you too." I squeezed my eyes shut as my entire face burned with embarrassment. "I love you too, so please stop saying it. I'm going to burst into flames if you keep going." I heard Henry chuckle, warm and genuine, before he gently took my hands away from my face. When I finally peeked at him, our faces were only inches apart. His eyes were filled with so much affection it made my heart flutter. "I really do love you, YN," he whispered. I smiled shyly. "I know I love you too." His hand gently cupped my cheek. "May I kiss you?" I gave a tiny nod. He slowly closed the remaining distance, giving me every chance to pull away. I never did. His lips met mine in a soft, gentle kiss, one filled with every unspoken feeling we'd both been carrying. When we finally pulled apart, our foreheads rested together. "Henry, how many times do I have to tell you that I don't need you to walk me to work?" I rolled my eyes as we walked hand in hand down the sidewalk. "Well, you won't quit your job and let me take care of you," he replied without missing a beat. I let out a dramatic groan. "Listen, every woman knows she should have her own money in a relationship, and—" "Okay," Henry interrupted matter-of-factly. "Then I'll pay you to be with me." I stopped walking and slowly turned to stare at him. "You!" He looked back at me innocently. "You are crazy." Henry simply hummed as though his suggestion was perfectly reasonable, making me shake my head before continuing toward the bookstore. "We only started dating not that long ago. It's healthy for us to be independent for a while." "Not too independent," he mumbled. A laugh escaped me. "You're unbelievable." The rest of the walk passed in comfortable silence. It wasn't awkward in the slightest. It was peaceful. A lot had changed since I became Henry's girlfriend. I now had a bodyguard following me everywhere. I rarely actually saw him, but I always knew he was nearby. Henry wasn't around nearly as much during the day anymore either. It didn't take me long to realize he'd been skipping meetings or working from his phone just to spend more time with me before we started dating. Now, he only walked me to work in the mornings and picked me up afterward, though that certainly didn't stop him from texting me throughout the day. Good morning texts, reminders to eat lunch, random questions about what book I was reading, and the occasional, "I miss you." It was ridiculously sweet. Then there was the fact that Henry had somehow started living at my apartment without either of us ever officially discussing it. One night we'd fallen asleep watching a movie together, and the next thing I knew, waking up beside Henry had quietly become part of my routine. Every single morning, I'd open my eyes to find him still asleep beside me, and every single morning my heart forgot how to function. When we finally reached the bookstore, I unlocked the front door, but before I could step inside, Henry tightened his hold on my hand. I looked back at him to find him pouting ever so slightly. I smiled, tilting my head. "I'll see you later." Standing on my tiptoes, I pressed a quick kiss to his cheek. Henry accepted it for exactly half a second before gently catching my chin and stealing a proper kiss from my lips instead. My entire face immediately turned bright red. He smiled, clearly pleased with himself. "I'll be here when you get off." I chuckled, shaking my head. "You're clingy, you never leave me alone." Henry didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he gave my hand another squeeze and nodded without the slightest bit of embarrassment. "Of course not." His eyes softened as he looked at me. "My life belongs to you."